Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys a little bit about uses for chains besides just contrast weight. Now that's one of the things I've talked about quite a bit, stuff I'll cover more in the future, and most people understand that about chains who at least know the basics. Right, we use them to create contrast weight. In the case of what you're seeing me there doing speed pulls, speed deadlifts. We do it on max effort work. We do it on a lot of things to change the weight at the top versus the bottom. And because chains are a stagnant weight, they're not like bands, they're different. It's basically like adding small little plates for each link of chain as you go up, so that it's just a mechanical difference as far as the weight on the bar goes, generally at least. And so what that tends to do, if you have 100 pounds of chains and say 300 pounds on a barbell, you usually have 300 pounds at the bottom if the chains are fully unloaded, and if the chains are fully picked up off the floor at the top, you'll have 400 pounds at the top. So right, you have 100 pounds difference of contrast weight. Now that in and of itself is used for a lot of things, from speed training to strength curves to everything else. But one of the topics that tends to come up also is what else can we do with them? All right, and I mean, we can even use them to actually replicate some of the old school strongman methods of changing range of motion, which you guys watched me do as far as my own rotation on the box squat, right? And you guys watched me go from a 440 to a 502 box squat over the course of several months. I used that method with chains. It's for my primary work to get there. We obviously did supplemental work. So that's obviously another method, and I feel like maybe that deserves its own video. But what about things like joint health, joint integrity? And I think the lifter Jason Robson, who a lot of you know and respect out there, he comments in my stuff, and he's a real strong guy. He's a middle-aged guy who is very, very strong still. And he pointed out a lot of what I'm doing here is actually really intelligent training for us guys who aren't 25. Right, guys who are 20 and 25 who train, they don't understand these things because they've never experienced these problems. They don't worry about inflammation when doing 15 or 20 really hard sets for a muscle in a week, right? This is not an issue for them. They can just sleep, eat, everything else. Their tendons and joints don't have problems unless they do something really stupid. Well, when you're a more advanced lifter and you're getting older, you have to pay attention to things like connective tissue inflammation. You have to pay attention to things like where you have joints or tendons put at certain angles where you're weakest, where using some of this various accommodating resistance is actually easier. It's actually easier on your joints. It can be easier on your tendons. I mean, a perfect example, if you think about it, the bench press is an example of that. A lot of people who don't understand pressing, mainly bodybuilders, think things like, oh, the lockout is the hardest on your joints. That's not true. It's hardest at the bottom. So messing with things like contrast weight to where you have just a little less weight at the bottom, which is also where the most mechanical tension is on the muscle. Obviously that's the hardest, but it also places the most strain on things like shoulder joints, especially if you're going to go with a wider grip bench, right? There's more strain on your shoulders. And by messing with more contrast weight, you can still get full muscle fiber recruitment with less strain on the joint at that point. Right? It's sometimes the terminal ends of the exercises, because a lot of times people will start reducing range of motion. They'll reduce range of motion for what purpose? Being easier on their joints. And then you have to add more weight, but you also lose muscle fiber recruitment. Well, a lot of what we're doing there is the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing. Except that we're training the full range of motion. So we're still replicating some of the partial of making things easier on those parts that might be getting a little bit flamed, to get hurt a little bit, maybe get stretched, get overused. We're making it a little easier there. Instead of just removing the range of motion and just using a slightly heavier weight for a partial, we can do the same thing with chains. What about when we deal with exercises that cause tendonitis? I mean, what you guys will see me do up next. How about the JM press? The JM press is very, very well known by many lifters for being a phenomenal bench press accessory, because it trains the triceps in a way that carries over so perfectly to the bench press. It has complete specificity. It can develop elbow tendonitis easily if you're not careful. And one solution a lot of guys do is they go to the floor press with it. Like I do it with the floor press with a chain. And that works, but if you still wanted to just do the normal movement to where you don't have that dead stop at the bottom. If you look at what's happening with my elbows, very similar in some ways to what happens on a tricep extension standing up or a skull crusher done incorrectly. Right? It puts a lot of strain on your tendons of your triceps, especially at the bottom. Well, what happens if you just run a lighter weight there? Like, look at what I'm doing in these. I only have 115 pounds at the bottom. For me, that's pretty lightweight on the JM press. I can do more. I can do sets of 10 with 20 pounds heavier than I've got on the bar. But it deloads that strain on the tendon, because right there at that point at the bottom sometimes on a movement like this, especially when you think about the amount of elbow travel, it can rub the tendon against the bone a little bit. But by reducing the load there, we're still training the tricep, right? We're still putting that full range of motion on it, but we're unloading a lot of the weight there. And then what happens? We go to a heavier lockout, and on this I've got like 75, 80 pounds of extra lockout weight, right? So we turn it into close to 200 pounds at the top, right? About 190, 195 pounds at the top, close to. On an exercise that, again, normally I would do less weight. So what ends up happening? We take that point, we're at a mechanical disadvantage, and maybe the tendons might be subject to a little bit of overuse, and we make it easier there. And then we overload the top, the lockout, where the triceps really have a big mechanical advantage. It's easier, we can handle more weight, all that stuff. And, you know, we can lock much, much harder as a result of doing that. That's very, very beneficial, especially for overall development, because even though we're losing some at the bottom, because we're actually creating a much higher degree of tension than we would have at the normal strength curve at the point where the muscle has the mechanical advantage and where the tendons have the least strain and everything on them, we can still normalize the muscle fiber recruitment. We can still get maximum muscle fiber recruitment all the way through in spite of that. So it's just simply much easier on your tendons. So we could do more volume, because if we can do an exercise like this, it really trains an effect we want, maybe a weak point for the triceps on the bench or even for their overall size. We can do so in a way that is just simply easier on our tendons. And you have to remember, high training volume on your tendons is what tends to get the master's lifter, and master means over 40, for those who are unfamiliar with the term. Master's athletes over age 40. That's what tends to get us, especially as training volume gets high. Right? This is a solution for that. And you can do this on a lot of exercises. Think it through on different exercises. Then we have this one in slow motion, and one I had uploaded before. Tricep rollouts with chains. Skull crushers are notorious for causing tendonitis, right? They're a perfect example. They are notorious for tendonitis. This is a complete solution. One of the things that people notice, the two things that people normally say helps with tendonitis tremendously in the elbows on these sort of movements. Number one, trying to get the thing behind your head, right? So that you don't keep the elbows in a fixed position, so you have some shoulder travel. Number two, oftentimes going to dumbbells so that you go to that neutral grip, right? What about replicating the exact same effect we just talked about, using the chains in such a manner that we did on the JM press? Because it's that bottom of the movement that creates the tendonitis. And it's also where we're the weakest. So we take that point and we unload most of the weight, and we start getting it started. And then the triceps have to engage very, very quickly to lock that weight that is increasing as we go. And then at the lockout, where usually our triceps have an enormous mechanical advantage, where it's usually really easy, we then have a really heavy weight as we start approaching that lockout position. So the triceps at their most contracted position are having to work super hard. So we can do stuff like this and create a strength curve that a lot of machines and stuff are built attempting to replicate. We can do it with chains. And we can do so in a manner that is easier on our tendons. It reduces tendonitis. It reduces wear on the connective tissue. Because this isn't always productive wear, right? There's good wear and there's bad wear. There's adaptative stress that can make tendons stronger, but then there's certain forms of stress that just inflame it. And usually when a tendon rubs hard against a bone, instead of just, say, tensile strength pulling stress. That's what we don't want a lot of. We want the tendon to be pulled on. We want the tendon to get stronger and adapt. But we don't want the other thing to happen. And that is a solution to it. That will fix it. All right, so that exercise, another example of using the chain on a variation of an exercise already there to fix that problem, they can ensure a different and possibly superior muscle fiber recruitment curve that is easier on tendons. All right, this is how we prevent overuse injuries. This is how we prevent inflammation. This is how we prevent tendonitis, so that we can train harder with more volume and recover from it and adapt faster. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.